Great events create great brands, and it takes a village to put on an event that engages, excites, and connects audiences to your brand. And we're that village. I'm Alyssa.
I'm Paulina.
And I'm Rachel.
And you're listening to Great Events, the podcast for all people interested in events and marketing. Hello, everyone. What has been going on in this wide world of events? My name is Alyssa, and welcome to this week's episode of Great Events, a podcast by Cvent. This week, I am super excited. Thought we were going to have a full house. Paulina was not actually able to join us today, but myself, we have Rachel on the podcast, and I am very excited to introduce a special guest coming to us live from London, Michael Newton, who is here to help us celebrate Pride Month, not only just at Cvent, but at Great Events, our podcast. So, hey, Michael, how's it going?
Hey, it's going good. It's a rare sunny day in London, so we don't get those too often.
Yeah, that's a chance to celebrate in of itself, right? Why are you even here? Why did you agree? You should have canceled on us. All right, so Michael actually sits on our account management team within our European sales division. So that's one of the hats that Michael wears, but he also comes to us as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And so, Michael, I just wanted to introduce you to the podcast and let you kind of explain to our listeners, our followers, a little bit more about what you do at Cvent and beyond.
Yeah, again, thanks so much for inviting me along. So, as was said, Michael Newton, I'm the senior manager for our account management team based in Europe. I look after part of the European team as well as our IMEA and Singapore teams. So I work far too many time zones for my personal liking. I've actually just celebrated my 10-year anniversary of Cvent on Saturday. So yeah, it's been 10 years of Cvent and the events industry, which is amazing. But alongside kind of Cvent, I also run a charity outside Cvent called the P3 Network, which is a charity that helps prospective and LGBTQ plus parents, go through their journey of setting up their families, issues in the workplace, issues at school gates, things like this. And I also do public speaking around my own personal journey for corporates, and we're called storytellers. So I kind of go in, tell my story, my journey around my journey as a gay man in the corporate world, as well as kind of my journey through my HIV diagnosis 11 years ago as well. And then, yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. I feel like I should get a hobby or something, but I'm like, where I put it.
No, I think you should dial it down a little bit. You seem like a very, very busy individual, Michael. And we're very honored that you carved out a little bit of time for us on the podcast today, and you're joining us in this conversation. Great. So with that, I think, it's funny, Rachel and I were talking and trying to prepare for this conversation today. And one of the things that we were even stumbling on is it LGBTQ plus? Is it LGBTQIA plus? So we wanted to start our conversation with just like a level setting on the definitions, because we know that this is an evolving space and there's changes. And part of our position as allies to this community is making sure that we're up to date on everything, as our, we feel our role to our followers is to keep our followers up to date as well. So can you just give us like a little bit of a schooling on all the acronyms?
Yeah, so everyone will be very familiar with LGBT. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. As you mentioned, that has developed over time. And, I know it can be difficult for people to kind of keep updated and keep themselves kind of aware of what letters should be being used and what selection of the acronym should be being used. I want people to immediately know that there isn't a right or wrong to this. Some groups will use just LGBTQ plus. Some people will use LGBTQIA plus. Some people will use other versions of it. But in terms of kind of the letters, we'll just say for
the letters
that have been added on that people might not be as familiar with, are obviously QIA, and then kind of what does the plus mean? So when we look at the Q, that's queer or question. So queer is it's a term that's used, and it's really considered as somewhat of an umbrella term for anyone who is non-cisgendered or heterosexual. For the longest time, it was considered a slur. And it's really something that the community have kind of reclaimed and taken back as their own. And, some people do still find it offensive. Some people do use, I use queer as an umbrella term, but I have friends that are like, no, you shouldn't be using that. It's really offensive. And I think people are allowed to kind of have their own kind of version on that. But it's also for people who are maybe, not sure where they sit. They know they sit somewhere on the spectrum. So it's I think it is a good term in terms of allowing for people to know that they are part of it, but they're on that journey of discovering where do I actually, and they might always sit in that queer section, but they're allowed to kind of go on that journey. Then you've got I, which is for intersex. So this is the term that's used to describe an individual who's born with a variation of sex characteristics, and they don't necessarily fit into the binary of a male body or a female body. And again, they kind of sit somewhere in between. And again, for those people that are intersex, they're on a journey. They may decide to stay in that section, but they may decide to kind of go one way or the other at another point in time. Then you've got A, which is asexual. This is sometimes shortened to ace. So this is a term that's used to reference somebody who has little or just like no sexual attraction. But at the same time, they might experience romantic attraction, but it's just not a sexual desire in that instance. And then the plus. So this is used to really signify all gender identities and sexual orientations, and it isn't necessarily specifically tied into those initial kind of few terms that we kind of ran through. So as an example, something you might find is two spirits being considered under the plus, or pan-Indigenous American identities, things like this. So there's a whole, we'd be here far too long if we ran through everything. We wouldn't cover anything else if we ran through kind of all of the other kind of acronyms that fall under the plus side of things. But yeah, that's kind of, I guess, a high level overview of LGBTQIA plus at large.
Super interesting. I honestly feel like I'm learning something already here. Like I didn't even know what all the letters stood for. And I do actually know the letters. I just didn't know what they represented because I myself am not part of these. Would we call them kind of micro communities or smaller community, or just I know broadly we refer to the LGBTQIA plus community, but clearly there's differentiation between all of these subsets. So, something to foster. And when we start talking about, belonging and inclusivity, there are differences between just even the community within LGBT plus. So I'm curious how you kind of segment even within the community itself.
I always like to think of it as LGBTQIA plus is a city. So it's London. And then each of the letters within the acronym, that's a different borough of London. So one part is Suffolk, another part is Surrey, another is Camden, and we all live in the same city, but we also have our own little sections. That's how I always like to think of the LGBTQIA plus kind of acronym in my mind.
I like that. That's a good way to think about it. Okay, so my next question for you, Michael, especially as you've been now at Cvent for 10 years, what a perfect milestone to be celebrating and talking about, what you've noticed as a change over time in this industry now. And I don't know if you were in the meetings and events industry prior to starting at Cvent, but certainly over your 10-year span here within our organization, I expect you've seen a change in support, in allyship, in just even having the conversation for this community. So I'm curious, just what are some of those subtle changes or large changes that you've noticed over time?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the changes really come in play, I would say, in the last 5 or so years. I think little things were happening, but I think we're now seeing kind of bigger strides. And I think a lot of it really goes around, making sure that events are delivering diverse and inclusive content. So how are people doing this? When you're presenting, you need to start looking at, people learn differently, people engage differently. How are you communicating with an audience? A lot of panels, I have a number of friends in the industry, and I think Rach, me and you have spoken about this term before, we were seeing a lot of manels. We were seeing a lot of panels just consistently made up of white. It sounds weird me saying it as a white man.
Yeah. Guilty.
Yeah. So, I tend to be like, hey folks, or hey crew, because I don't want to unnecessarily offend somebody by using, a male term, ideally. And I've had this conversation with so many people like, but guys, it's just like, it's just a throwaway term. I'm like, it is to you, but there might be somebody in that audience who, they might be transitioning and it might be a trigger word for them and things like this. You don't necessarily know everyone that's in the audience. So, for me, I don't even really refer to people by gender terms anymore because, again, I don't know how they identify. So I typically just, as a standard, will refer to somebody as they or that. Some people find it offensive. I'm like, no, it's a safety net for me. And things like that as well. So
would you say, Michael, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Would you say like in the last 10 years we've evolved? Because I feel like as an ally, and I'm not in the community necessarily, but the events industry specifically has called enough attention to this, not enough, but enough attention where we've moved the needle on pronouns, inclusive language, speakers, to your point, like representation, anti-harassment policies and things like that, and registration. Like, would you say that we've made strides there, and have we made enough strides there? Do you feel like the meetings industry specifically is helping lead the charge there? Like, I'm just curious, like, have we done a lot here? Do we need to do more?
Yeah, I think the meetings industry, definitely, the meetings industry is probably one of the most diverse industries that you can work in the entire world. We're not, lawyers. We're not people that work in finance. We're every possible industry that you could work in one industry at the end of the day.
And you're in the business of bringing people together, right? Like that at the core of this it's fostering that notion of togetherness.
Yeah. And, I think that there's always more that can be done. There's always more that can be done, and I think some things people do kind of forget about when you start looking at kind of partners that you're working with at events and things like that. Do they share the same kind of mindset and beliefs as you as an organization that's kind of running the events and things like this? But I think we've definitely seen, a shift, seeing people come on stage and, introduce it and use pronouns, seeing people having the ability to have pronouns on their badges and things like this. Accessibility, making sure that, when somebody's registering for an event, for example, they have the option to choose a pronoun in that section. I think pronouns is something that I'm kind of focusing on here, but I think it's one of those little kind of micro, people would see it as a microaggression if it wasn't there. And it's kind of an easy one to kind of fix. But then, as we were saying, making sure that we've got those diverse speakers, we've got those diverse conversation points that are happening. All of that stuff is definitely something that I've seen improve. And, we're seeing, a lot of people and a lot of organizations globally really kind of target in on this and, opening up, what they're looking for within their events. So when we're doing kind of abstract submissions and things like this, putting in that, we're really looking for people that fall into kind of these categories, or this is just an open forum where we're taking conversation topic points from kind of anything. So then you're mixing it up and you've got that side of things, utilizing people that you also have internally to be able to pull people in for those conversations as well. When I joined Cvent, that was my first time kind of in the events industry. I was working for a different tech company previously, but it was in kind of business marketing. And like I said, didn't really see a huge amount of variety. People like a bit of spice with their food. Why not bring a little bit of spice to the events? When I think about, and it was actually my friend Chris said this to me last week, and I was like, that is perfect. When you start looking at, okay, like how do you describe kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And he was like, well, diversity is when you invite somebody to the party. And then inclusion is actually asking somebody to dance. The three of us have been to many parties together. We've shared many glasses of wine together. Who doesn't like to be invited to parties, and who doesn't like to dance? So I think, and I was like, that is such a unique and easy way to understand it. So, when we invite people to our events, we want them to get up and be dancing. So let's make sure that the content that we've got for them and the platform that we've set up allows for that.
Michael, let me ask you one more question that kind of dovetails from that. Recently, I want to say within the last maybe 12 months, I've heard belonging being added to, let's talk acronyms again, DE&I, and now there's a B. So what's the difference between the dancing right there, where that's the inclusive experience, and then the belonging part of it as well.
Yeah. So the belonging is the emotional state behind everything. So creating that inclusive environment where people do feel safe and they feel welcome. So when I think of that kind of that dance metaphor, so if you get invited to the party and then inclusion is dancing, I think of the belonging as feeling comfortable enough to ask somebody if they want to dance. So knowing that you can go and ask a question, you can feel safe. You're not going to have to kind of worry that something's going to backfire on you. And when I talk about this, and I kind of have these discussions with people, and I use Cvent as an example. As you both know, in 2020, I was the keynote. Sales kickoff, which is thousands of people, which is kind of daunting, and shared my story about kind of my upbringing, coming out as gay, my HIV diagnosis, and then kind of coming out from that side of things. Cvent really has, in my mind anyway, and again, different people are going to have kind of different viewpoints on it, created that sense of belonging, because I would never have felt comfortable kind of getting on stage and doing that, thinking there's going to be a repercussion. This is going to be used against me. People, when they're joining an organization, shouldn't have to check themselves at the door. They should be able to come in, be who they are. I always joke that Cvent for the last 10 years have let me come into work every day and be my weird self, and they just accept it. And I like to think that I bring my whole self into work. And I feel like that, as a manager, trickles down to the people that report into me, that they feel comfortable to come to me with issues that they're facing outside work and things like this. So I do think that for me is how I would view the belonging side of things.
Yeah, it's the vulnerability and authenticity, no reluctance, right? And to your point, it's a safe environment. Sorry, Rach, I didn't want to cut you off.
No, I'm good. I just think it comes down to your event, your organization, right? Like if you're trying to create a sense of belonging. I'm just thinking with my planner brain on, like, a lot of people may have hesitations to doing this at their events potentially, right? And I think that it's a pretty easy way. It's pretty easy, right? Like, I think that there are ways to ask registration questions to help with what your attendees actually want on site. So I've seen a lot. I've registered for a few industry events lately, and granted, they're the meetings industry, so we're pretty honed in on being accepting and inclusive. So, but they've asked things like, what kind of meetups would you like? And they list out a lot of these what did you call it? Sub communities, basically.
Micro community
questions, where it's like, would you be interested in doing this? And what that's formed is these inclusive groups that get together and meet up at these events, that they can create connections with that. And I think you can do that at your own organization too. And I think that is also part of what's changed in the last 10 years, Michael. Is just like from my perspective as a planner and looking at event design, right? Like, that's changed a lot. We didn't have that, and having these roundtables or meetups or, mixers or whatever you want to call it, incorporated in there as an option for your attendees helps you be a better ally. And it also helps you connect people to feel safe, to feel that sense of belonging, correct? Like, right? Like, I'm assuming
it's about acknowledging and celebrating those differences, as opposed to being like, oh, it's easier if we make generalizations. And so we're going to just this is a stupid example, but like, everybody gets chocolate chips, or chocolate chip cookies, right? No, it's like, some people might be allergic to chocolate. Some people don't like chocolate, and all of those people want a different cookie type, and that's fine. Like, we'll figure that out in the planning process.
And it doesn't have to be like 17 different meetups, right? It could be like, here's our little area that you can do your own meetup, and put the onus back on your attendees too. Like, I think sometimes it's daunting to organizers to be like, oh my God, I don't have the budget to support 20 different mixers. It's like, well, you could have one, but then subgroups in it, or an area where they can form their own mixers, right?
Yeah, and I was going to say, just kind of what you were saying about kind of that registration side of things, that's a perfect first hit for organizations to be able to communicate their values. Using the website, the registration form, social media, marketing materials, you can use all of these assets that you have to actually foster that inclusivity. The communication that you're going to be dishing out isn't just about the words, but it's also about factoring in things like the imagery that you're using as well. So does that represent all of your target audience? If your event, said the word earlier, is specifically targeted at, let's say, white men, use photos of white men all over your website. Do it. Go for it. Have at it. But most events now are
Manels for everyone. Manels everywhere.
but it's, you're wanting to get, and I look at the customers that I get to speak with. They're trying to get more numbers to the events. They're trying to get they're having to do bigger events with smaller budgets and things like this. So if they're able to get a more diverse audience, the good thing about that is you're getting more diverse thoughts. So when I think of things like you have like a sales kickoff, it's like, hey, we're going to put you into like these subgroups and things like this. Don't put all of the SDRs together and all of the account managers together, all of the directors together, all the people from Europe together, things like, mix it up, because you're going to get different thought processes. You're going to get different ages, different genders, different everything, So if you're able to kind of mix all of this stuff up, and to what you were saying, Rach, about, giving people the options to go into those kind of sub break off groups and things like this, they can kind of pick and choose kind of where they want to go and kind of sit in. And you're going to get much better diverse forms of thinking. But you should also have that logic when it comes to your planning. It shouldn't just be all of the same people that are just on the event planning team. And Rach, you might be like, shut up, Michael, shut up. As the person that plans all of the events as the event. But it's, we having people that are maybe outside of the events group, kind of contributing to, hey, like we're wanting to kind of think about doing these sessions or have this piece as part of the this and that within it. That's going to give, outside thinking that you're like, oh, that's a great idea. I would never have thought about kind of doing that.
Yeah. Well, let's switch topics to actual Pride Month. So yeah. I know, Pride is a beautiful way to celebrate and, represent the progress that you all have made. But I want to hear from you of like, your view of Pride Month, your view of the celebration. For me as a planner, I love an event that brings together people that can celebrate love. Like, I think that that's a great excuse to throw an event and multiple events, a whole month of them. So I want to hear
every weekend.
Yeah, exactly. So for you, Michael, like, let's talk about Pride Month, what it means to you, what you think it means in the events industry or for organizations. I just hit us with everything here.
Pride Month for me is, and I'm a gay man 12 months of the year. I occasionally take September off, but it depends on what my calendar is. Usually 12 months of the year I'm a gay man.
Which letter is that one, Michael? I'm kidding. Don't answer that.
Delusional. It's D. It's delusional. But for me, Pride Month is about being able to celebrate everyone's uniqueness. The great thing about being a human is that we're all different. And I think sometimes people forget that. There's a lot of craziness going on in the world right now. And a lot of people do ask, like, why do we still need Pride? The corporates are doing this and we've got this. And I remember somebody said to me, they were like, why do you need Pride? You've got marriage now. I was like, oh, don't make me hit you. Don't make me hit you. Like, oh. But there's still so much going on in the world. There's so many places where being LGBTQIA plus is illegal. You can be fined. You can go to prison. You can go to torture. You can be tortured. You've got countries like Iran where you can be sentenced to death just for being kind of who you are. In the US at the moment, there's a lot of laws being kind of put out there and things like this. There was the Don't Say Gay bill, and, which means that, if a child confided in their teacher about their sexuality, that teacher then had to report this. And ultimately, Pride and the events around Pride, they're about human rights. They're about empowering LGBTQIA people to reclaim their rights, their freedoms that are just denied to them. And, being able to go to public places that maybe, do often exclude them. In Pride, we've discussed this previously about, kind of rainbow washing and things like this. And a lot of organizations be like, hey, it's June. We're just going to stick a rainbow on it, kind of thing. And that's really, yeah, okay, to a certain extent, it's great because there is a bit of visibility, but that visibility should be all year. Visibility is so crucial for fighting shame and stigma and threats and violence within the community. And these Pride events and organizations getting behind their employees and getting behind these causes, it's showing support and showing how we should be celebrating these differences, and shows the LGBTQ plus community that they don't need to be intimidated, and they can continue to demand that equality, until, how should I put this? I've always said that there's a lot of stigma within the LGBTQIA plus community within their own kind of sub communities, if you will. And I can only talk about, and you said earlier about me being kind of an expert in DE&I. I don't think of myself as an expert in DE&I. I'm an expert in my lived experience. I know what my lived experience is, and I can talk to the experiences of a lesbian or trans person, but it's me reflecting what I know, kind of thing. And I think, I got diagnosed in 2012 with HIV, and I've received a lot of very unfavorable comments, I will say, because some of the language would not be acceptable for this podcast in that time from within the community. And bizarrely, the heterosexual community I've never had an issue with anybody who is, heterosexual in terms of my HIV, but lots of issues within the gay community around it. And it's, again, because you've got kind of those kind of old mentalities of what HIV was in the 80s and the epidemic and all this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of education that still needs to happen kind of around that. But for me, I don't think we will end up having kind of equality across the board until we have equality within our own community. So seeing, people kind of walking hand in hand with each other is a beautiful thing, and we need more people to be doing that. But until people feel that they're safe to do that, and they're going to be able to kind of walk outside hand in hand, like me and my boyfriend, we walk arm in arm, but there are occasions where we'll unlink. And I live in London, which is one of the kind of, most diverse cities in the world. And even here, it's still a bit kind of like, oh, no, there's a group of people walking towards us. Oh, no, let's just unlink kind of thing. And I think we need to get to a point where we do feel safe. And I think having people being open to having conversations like this, and having people that are allies all year round, not just for June, that's key in making sure that, that kind of acceptance and pride will continue. And pride's going to be something that's always happening. It's a beautiful time to, like we said, celebrate people's uniqueness. And I don't necessarily feel like there'll ever be a time, and maybe it's a little narrow-minded of me, but I don't think there's ever going to be a time where pride isn't needed as a celebration. It might change when it's celebrated, but I think there'll always be a version of pride.
Yeah, I think I didn't really think about this too deeply, and I probably should, but the fact that pride is inspiring, like some places probably can't even host pride because of fear of, retaliation, or it's illegal. And that's a really good point for why it's so important. Like, it's important for a lot of different reasons, not just corporations slapping a rainbow flag on the outside of their building and calling it like, check, we did it. There's more that can be done bringing people together. I think that's why the meetings industry goes really well with pride, because a lot of our own beliefs are, let's think about it, getting people together, right? Check. Inspiring people, uniting them, creating bigger sense of purpose. That's half of what event planners do. So I feel like pride in itself lends itself to what we do for a living, but pride on a much larger scale for human rights.
Yeah. And if we can ultimately instill those values into all the events that we do that are year round, right? It's not just a June conversation, but if we kind of bring these attributes to light through our event programs, where it's kind of a win-win for everyone, right? It's an inclusive world. It's an inclusive environment born out of our event programs, which is a really exciting opportunity that planners have.
Yeah. And people always say, hate isn't taught. I always say that my favorite Pride that I ever went to was Pride in London in 2017, because as a part of my charity, we hosted an event where we were at Cafe Royale in London, and we were on a balcony area, and we were overlooking, and we could see the whole parade. But people had brought their children, and there was maybe 50 adults and probably 30 or 40 kids, ranging from kind of babies up to kind of teenagers. And it was just a room just full of so much love. The kids were looking, and there's drag queens and everything, and they're like, oh my God, that's such a tall lady. How is she walking? Look at her hair. She's beautiful, and things like this. And then you have things like DragCon, and people take their kids to it. These are safe spaces that allow for kids to grow up knowing that if they're a bit different, that's cool. And I think, like you said, Rach, the events industry really is a place where people can come and feel safe. And, it's made up of such a diverse character set of people just globally. And kind of knowing that I work in an industry made up of just these wonderful, beautiful people that are just from every possible corner of every spectrum and every part of the world and things like this, it makes me excited to kind of get up and come to work every day.
Well, on that note, Michael, I think that was a perfect way to wrap this. I know we're celebrating a lot of things, wonderful weather in London, your 10-year anniversary at Cvent, but the most important of all, Pride Month. And really, honestly, Pride all year, which is what we're really getting to here. But with that, I'd like to wrap up this episode. Thank you all, followers, for joining us in today's conversation. Thank you once again to Michael for joining us. Thanks, Rachel, as always, for helping me co-host this. If you have any topics or people you'd like to introduce to our 2023 season, you always have the option to DM us on LinkedIn, Instagram, or send us a note at greatevents@cvent.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to a very important conversation today. Once again, this is Great Events. My name is Alyssa. See you next time.